Welcome. Thank you for coming to the production talk. I'm so excited to see lots of faces interested in production, and production getting more and more spotlight over the years in game development and people recognizing its importance. So what inspired me to create this talk today was the notion of people generally knowing that producers do a lot of stuff that has to do with Jira, with tickets, with epics and sprints and all of that. But that's only a small percentage of what we do, and when questioned further, people tend to not necessarily know exactly what we do. So I wanted to shine a little bit more light onto the other aspects of production, and the analogy I like to draw is comparing production to the engine oil in your car. When it's there and it's running well, you don't even think about it, but when something goes wrong in production and in your processes, you will know straight away. And the way I structured it is as a collection of sticky notes. So if any of you are producers who do production, you will probably agree that a sticky note is the best tool in a producer's kit. Whether it's a physical sticky note on your screen or a digital sticky note on your Miro board, one way or another, that's one of the best tools, I think. And I also added some memes because my team really likes memes, so we'll just see how that flies. So just a super brief, super brief intro about me, just so you know where my perspective is coming from. I have very sort of colorful background. A lot of my background is in engineering, so I worked with micro nano electronics for plasma deposition for wildlife tracking here in New Zealand for a company based in Hawke's Bay. So a lot of my experience in project management comes from a very sort of hands-on manufacturing environment on one hand, but on the other hand, I've worked on many projects in the gaming industry over the years. I'm a passionate gamer myself, and over the years I've been involved in narrative and QA and production, and have done some of my own designs as well, so sort of a bit of a colorful background. And where it's all met together is in my current role. I work for a company called TensorWorks. We're based in Cairns in Australia, and we're the largest contributor to the Unreal Engine in Australia. We work directly with Epic Games on the Unreal Engine features, on the streaming features, pixel streaming, Unreal Engine and containers as well, which is a whole science on its own. So lots of very sort of bleeding edge kind of stuff, and Wine as well, which is running Windows applications under Linux, because people like Linux a lot more than they do Windows. All right, let's jump into it. So if you were to take away one thing from my talk today, let this be this thing, is daily check-ins with your team. Make sure that you have a format. If you are a producer, or if you have a producer or considering hiring a producer, this talk is also supposed to give you a bit of an insight of the other areas of the business where they can bring more impact. So with daily check-ins, choose a format that works for your team. For our team, for example, we do end-of-day check-ins as opposed to the morning, and we do them in writing in threads as opposed to stand-up. It alleviates the pressure from people in the morning to need to remember what they did yesterday. Some people are still asleep, some people tend to start at different times. End-of-day provides them a nice platform to sort of put a ribbon on what they worked on throughout the day. But also it's a platform for people to share the progress. And one of the things I'll talk a lot about today is abstracting production practices from this is a strict process that we have to follow to, hey, these are these tools that enable people's productivity and enables people's creativity as well. So daily check-ins with your team is a platform for them to get excited about something they've worked on, to share the progress on something they've done and say, hey, look at this sketch that I've created for this new character that we're working on, or look at this little passage that I wrote for our narrative story that's just I'm very, very proud of. But it's also a great way for your team to raise any blockers. And we'll talk more about blockers and make sure that your team feels comfortable using that platform as well, which is why I say that it is up to you to choose a format that works for your team. I find production to be a very flexible discipline. There's no true answer. You need to find something that works for your team and for your company. Daily check-ins keep your team accountable as well, because they know that at the end of the day they'll need to show something. What have they been working on? What issues have they encountered? What's their progress? So it sort of puts the ball in their court a little bit as well. And daily updates are extremely effective for stakeholder visibility. And we'll talk about stakeholders as well, whether they're internal stakeholders, whether it's your directors, your internal sort of supervision, or external. Maybe it's the people who provide funds for your games, or some other committee that you're working with. So for you as a producer, the dailies provide a great sort of succinct information about where your team's at, how the progress is going. You can extract things out of those dailies and regurgitate them in a format that is suitable for your stakeholders and present that to them, and we'll talk about that in a moment as well. And if you can get your team to quote the tickets they're working on, I did say we weren't going to talk about Jira, but we will of course talk a little bit about Jira. You have to talk about Jira. If you get your team to quote the tickets they worked on, or quote assets they worked on, or interlink things, that's just a cherry on top of the cake, because it means that everything is traceable. You know that none of the work is going unnoticed, and nobody's working on something that you've not ticketed or not discussed, or that they dredged up from the backlog somewhere. So yeah, that's sort of a brief snippet of and the way I structured it is to have like little thoughts on these little sticky notes, so you can take pictures and then later look through them and go, oh yeah, let me try that thing and see if we can incorporate that. Personally, as a producer, make sure you are organized, and being organized is a huge part of the producer's role, and it's almost, I feel, should be in the job description. Make sure your routines are organized, and you will have a lot of routines: checking in with your team, reporting to your stakeholders, running meetings, creating any reports, running QA, budgeting, whatever, capacity planning. Make sure you have reminders for all of that. Make sure you have notes. You cannot afford to forget things. You are the one person in the business who cannot afford to forget anything. You have it written somewhere, you have a note, you have a reminder on whatever platform works for you. I really like using Trello. I like it because it's very simple, and you can find whichever platform, of course, suits you best. And in the same vein, with remembering everything is, of course, lots of reminders, and you will pass them on to your team as well. You cannot rely on people to necessarily remember everything. If you said to your team that you have a really important meeting on Friday, and you said that on Monday, you can almost guarantee that somebody will forget about that meeting on Friday. So it is your job to remind your people about that. Post reminders in shared channels, post reminders directly to people if you know that they might have been planning to, say, be out of office, and you want to make sure that they remember that. Any releases, deadlines, meetings, and sort of niggly little things. Oh yeah, we need to do that security training, right? That's, you are the kind of person who needs to go and make sure that everybody in the team does that. As a producer, you know your infrastructure of your business really, really well. Where do things live? Is it also sensible where they live? And if it's not, fix the system, move things around. If there's one document that you always need and you can never find, you are the person who needs to drive the change and say, we need to restructure this thing because nobody can ever find this documentation, or the naming convention of this asset structure that we've got makes no sense. Let's change it. You are the person to do that. You have everything at your fingertips. If you're in a meeting with your stakeholders and somebody mentions that report from last year that had that figure, you know what report they're talking about, you know where it is, and while the meeting is running, you already have that figure for them. You're searching for it, you can bring it up. That's your superpower. You sort of, I often feel, in our company, we have a lot of nautical sort of jokes and nautical themes that we have going, and I often, as a producer, I compare myself to sort of the person who wanders around the ship and sort of gets a feel for what's happening in every room. What's the temperature in every room? Is something on fire? And if multiple things are on fire, well, which fire is worse, right? That's kind of part of your job to figure that out as well. Be consistent and enforce consistency. Again, feeds back to, if people can't find things consistently, it probably means they're not named correctly, or they might not necessarily make sense. That's just one example. Make sure your system makes sense. And the reason I separated follow-ups into its own little category is because it can be a tricky one. It can be quite easy to send an email to somebody and say, hey, can you do that thing for me? And then check it off your list and forget about it, because technically speaking, you've done your part of the job. You've asked the person to do the thing for you. But realistically, it is your job to make sure that person doesn't forget to do that thing either. So you still need to have a way of remembering that that thing hasn't been done, or that thing needs to be followed up still. So that's on this. let's talk about meetings, because everyone loves meetings in companies. As I mentioned before, make sure your meetings and planning sessions are motivational, because it's very easy to fall into patterns where people go, oh, I have to go to this meeting and sit in there for 2 hours and listen to these people go on about things that are completely irrelevant to me. You want to make sure that that sort of mindset is changed, but it is also part of your role in how you structure, run, and plan your meetings, because it is the responsibility of a producer to do that. Making sure that these sessions are motivational and that people go, I'm going to come to this meeting and I will be heard. If I come with ideas, I'll have a platform to talk about them, and that it's a platform for people to get excited about things as well, because you can always reframe meetings as well and say, hey, next Monday we're going to discuss how locomotion is done in our game. People bring references, bring your favorite ideas, and that provides the space for people to talk about that. As I mentioned, as a producer, it is your job to structure and run meetings, to schedule, to agenda, invite only relevant people. It's very easy to get tempted to say, I'm going to send invites to these 10 different people. Do they really need to be there, or can you realistically just send them a summary afterwards and they can just briefly glance it and that's enough? And in a similar vein, allow people to peel off. If somebody needs to be at the meeting but can present their bit and then go, give them the option. They might want to stay, but maybe they have something urgent they'd rather take care of. So again, it's up to you to kind of orchestrate how this happens. Keep the agenda for meetings updated, keep it running in one place, and make sure people actually know what the meeting is about. How many of us have come to a meeting saying, I don't really know what we're going to talk about? This gives people the space to bring ideas, gives them their time to think about, but also removes anxiety. The worst thing you can do to somebody on a Friday afternoon to say, hey, can we catch up on Monday, ... You just ruined that person's weekend, because they're going to go and say, what did I do wrong? Am I getting fired? What's wrong? What's happening? Tell them, hey, let's catch up on Monday to discuss 2 briefs that you've provided. I love both of them and I can't decide which one to use. I really want your opinion. Make sure they know what's happening and alleviate that anxiety from them. During the meeting, stay an active and engaged listener, and this can be a very difficult thing, because as a producer you will be in a lot of meetings, and it's easy to sometimes check out a little bit, and I'm sure all of us do. Attention span is a thing, but again, it is part of your job to stay on top of what's happening and take notes, and keeping minutes is a big thing. I think a lot of to-dos and a lot of items and really great ideas die in the minutes that haven't been reread or haven't been properly taken. So make sure you are listening actively, you're writing things down, and then later on coming back to those things to turn them into tickets, turn them into items that need to be followed up. Keep your ear to the ground. If you smell smoke and say, wait a minute, were you just talking about that thing? We weren't really expecting to be working on that yet. It allows you to catch things beforehand, and we'll talk about that in a minute as well. And then share summaries as well. Once you've got your notes and your minutes and your action items, who needs to see that? Maybe it's stakeholders. Maybe it was a very important meeting in which you made some really big decisions. Then it is your job to create a summary, share it with the relevant parties, but also remember that those parties are probably very expensive people, so you want to make sure your summaries are to the point, they're very brief, and they cover everything very succinctly and eloquently, because those people don't have a lot of time to be reading. If you took 2 pages of notes, obviously they can't read that. And keeping meetings time-boxed and to time. This is supposed to say no longer, because I can't spell. Please don't keep meetings longer than 45 minutes if you can help it. Sometimes you have to have longer meetings, obviously, but you do have to recognize, especially if there's lots of people in it and it's going to run for 2 hours, you're going to lose half of your audience by the 20th minute, and then by the first hour you've hardly got anyone engaged. And if it's a meeting that requires creativity especially, it can be very, very difficult for people. So again, find a way to break them down, restructure so that you have relevant people, you have relevant context, and you can discuss issues, tackling issues one at a time, as opposed to let's discuss the whole thing that, let's talk about our character, right? Split it down. Let's talk about animations, let's talk about visuals, let's talk about controls, and you can, as an example, right? And you can go through it that way. This is one of the probably most important things that I think I can do as a producer for my team, is alleviating their workload in whatever way possible. And if my team is blocked, I will break my back to make sure they're not. It might be something minor, might be something that just annoys them, and if you can help them in some way, that's great. But it can also be major things that can be easily sort of, you can go, yeah, we'll figure it out at some point. Take initiative, make sure you do those things. If somebody says to you, hey, my software license is expiring in 7 days, you need to make sure that person has a new license by the time this one expires. Otherwise, you have a blocked resource, you have a blocked person who cannot do their job effectively, or has to task switch to something else and do something that maybe they're not as good at because it's not necessarily their main focus at the moment. And task switching and development inertia are really big things as well for your team. And sometimes it's niggly things as well, right? Little things. Can you help me figure that out? It's up to you as well. If you can separate your people from the red tape that your business might have, depending on the size of your business, smaller businesses probably don't have as much of it, but bigger businesses certainly do. Or it could be external red tape if you're working with funding with governments. There can be forms, applications, submissions, reports, all of that. Do as much of that lifting as you can. Create templates, fill in those templates for the people and say, hey, I need you to just fill in the bits that are missing. If it's some other form, if somebody is missing some IT access to something, you don't even need them there. You can go and request things on their behalf, which means they don't need to interrupt what they're doing. And then saying that you are an ultimate problem solver. You might not know exactly how to fix a problem, but you will make sure it gets fixed. You will drive it to the right people, you will talk to the right people, you'll find answers, and you will make sure that your developers are uninterrupted. Remove friction from communication, from any threads that you create. Provide people with links. This is a good example. If you're saying to somebody, what's the progress on such and such ticket? Just link it, right? Don't assume that people have access to it. Yes, they do, but it means they need to go and open another tab and find it and then go, what was that thing? Whereas you can just provide the link, right, in the first place. Share templates, as I mentioned. Provide ideas as well. Sometimes it can be easy to say, hey team, what are our thoughts on this thing? And sort of walk away from it and wait for people to respond and for them to start, for somebody to, supply their first idea. You could be that person. You could say, well, I thought about these things, and that can help start the conversation, and it can also help somebody else to take your idea and spin it in their direction and say, well, actually, what you said made me think about that thing. How about that? And that could be a really brilliant idea. I've talked about summarizing information. It can be meetings, but it can also be if you're starting any threads and you're needing to disseminate information, summarize it. Again, make sure that all the important bits are there, but make it brief. Sometimes can take quite a bit of time to restructure my message and make sure it's small, it's succinct, but it means that every other person who reads it saves the time not reading the bits that I took out, and depending on your crowd, it can be a large time saving, right? And also TLDRs, I'm really big on those. Sometimes, again, your stakeholders, our executive team, they don't need full context. You need to provide it, but they might not need it. So having a TLDR that says, thumbs up, it means everything is good. You don't need to worry about it. You can read it if you have the time, but if you don't worry about it. I'll just send them a happy GIF, and they know everything is under control. A little Jira segue again. Rabbit holes can be a big thing for developers, for creatives, when it's research and development stage, when it's stage of how do we solve this problem, how do we approach that. It can be very easy for developers and creatives to get caught in that loop of going, I'm going to go and do my research about this technical issue. Well, there's this one solution and there's this other solution. Oh, and this one looks better and I'm going to research that. Oh, but to do that, we need this. And they can just go away for weeks. And realistically, at the end of the process, you don't actually have anything because they've just done a lot of research, which is great, but it's not amounting to progress on what they're doing just yet. So we use spikes, which are small tickets, which say, okay, we need for you to research this problem, and we time box them, and we say you have a couple of days, or depending on the size of the problem, you can decide how long it is, for the developer, for that creative to go do some research, provide the basic framework and say, I found these 5 different solutions and this is what I managed to research about them. And then they can come back and you can decide with you knowing what the timelines of the project are, maybe you have somebody from the executive team, you can make a decision whether they need to go and do deeper research into any of the things they've already found, or whether they can go ahead and start working on one solution. And that allows you to have control over those things that can just really blow out very quickly, because it's very easy for that to happen. And I've already spoken about smelling smoke. That's something you always should be aware of. Keep your ear to the ground, listen to what people are saying, ask questions and be inquisitive. What did you mean when you said that? Make sure you'll catch a lot of issues and sort of trains going off tracks beforehand, because you go, wait, we're not supposed to do that yet. What? Information is a big one as well, and as a producer you're very well positioned, sort of having your fingers in different pies in the business. You're very well positioned to ensure that your business has a great knowledge base, and that it is actually updated. And people will always say, I'm busy, I'll do it another day. But everyone is always busy. You will never find the time if you let people not do it because they're busy. Make sure they carve out the time and make sure they can use the format that works for them, because they might want to write it down. Or maybe next time they're doing training on this one thing that only they know in the business, make them record it, make them go into a little bit more detail and explain a little bit more background. So it might be a longer training session, but at the end of it you'll have very useful material that you can just share internally. And onboarding materials goes along the same lines. All of us probably have been in the situation where they are asked to do something where there's no information about how to do that, or where to start, or how this software operates, or how this custom solution that your business has works, and nobody knows that. So that can save you a lot of headache. And plan for it in advance where you can. If you can create these materials as you go, it'll save you so much time further down the track, especially when new people start working on it. And the big part of the reason as well isn't just, of course it is to get people up to speed faster and unblock people faster, but also because people overestimate their memory a lot, and it is a psychological fact. We think we will remember, but we don't. Even when people go away on Christmas break for 2 weeks and then they come back and they go, what was I working on? How does that work? To make sure people leave notes for others, but also for themselves. If they're working in the code, make sure they leave sufficient comments so they can come back and go, oh yeah, that's why I did that. And they don't need to redo a whole bunch of things. An interesting one is SMEs, which is subject matter experts. If you have somebody who is a subject matter expert, there's one person and the only person who knows how to operate this piece of software, for example. We've already talked about making sure that you ensure that this information doesn't live in their brain and you document it somewhere. But at the same time, what do you do if they are blocked? What if they are working on an issue that is completely blocking them from any progress, and they've been bashing their head against the wall for 2 days and they're not getting anywhere with it, and there's nobody else in the business who can help them because that's their thing, they know the thing. So you need to have a plan for that as well. Do you have any internal people who need to have been trained to also understand that thing? Maybe you need external help, maybe you need a consultant, maybe you need to reach out to your contacts, or maybe you need to allow that person to go away and do their research. That's also fine. It depends on the situation, right? But make sure you have a plan for that. You've got hopefully source control and backups, wherever that is whether it's on GitHub or some other repository. That includes creatives. I went to an interesting talk a couple of years ago which was talking about using GitHub for creatives, and I really like that. It's great, not only because everything lives in one place, but you can actually see the history of who changed what and how. And this isn't blaming, and I really don't like that GitHub calls the feature blame, but I like the fact that you can see what the changes were, how they were made, and you can discuss with the team, and if you need to change something, you can work together with them. It's great. And for traceability, which sort of feeds into this information and ensuring that your team has access to all of this information freely, is if you're closing tickets or issues, whatever ticketing system you're using, make sure it quotes the PR that it closes with, right? If it's a code change or if it's a creative asset, make sure you quote that asset so somebody can go and say, oh, I didn't know we fixed that bug. Let me go and see how we fixed it because it actually matters to me. Or maybe it is important to me as a developer to know because that issue really bugged me and I need to understand how it was fixed, or maybe it was my code that somebody else fixed. And if you have that pull request quoted in there, they can very easily find that information. But it also gives stakeholders visibility as well, because if they jump onto, remember, they will only ever see the very high level view of your project. So if they want to jump onto your Jira board and see, okay, well, we've closed all of these issues and we've said we've created asset such and such and we've created animation for our character, for example, they need to be able to very easily find that information without needing to ask anybody. They can open the ticket, they have the link, they can see the asset straight away. Super, super helpful. Change list. So it's a similar thing to a pull request. It's basically a change in the code. How many of us have worked with product managers who do not know anything about their product they manage? It's happened to me several times in the career. I see some hands in the audience. Make sure that as a producer and a person who is across the entire business, you know your product. Make sure you are not that person. The best way to do it, in my opinion, is to do QA, because you are helping the QA team find bugs, test different gaming scenarios, but that actually means you are playing your game, you're using your software. Make sure that in doing that, you also testing for UX, user experience, user flows. What is the user going to be experiencing when they're playing your game? What is the intended approach to that? You are in a great position to be doing that with the depth of the knowledge, as I said, across the entire business, that you understand some technical stuff, you understand some creative, you understand some of the user flows. You're very well positioned to do that. Be curious and knowledgeable with the technology that you work with, especially with your engine. Can you use your engine? Is a good question. And do you have to? Sometimes maybe you don't, and that's perfectly fine, but it can give you, if you can take some time to do that and learn your engine, it'll give you so much more understanding into the problems that the problems that your team is facing, and it will also give you the tools to help them. Imagine if you're QAing a level and you find some loose asset somewhere that somebody in level design team just left behind. How much easier is it for you to go into the engine and just delete that asset than it is for you to create a ticket, describe where that asset is, file it for somebody in QA to pick it up, find it and fix it and close the ticket. It's like a whole ordeal, right? So it saves you so much more time as well. If you use CI/CD pipelines, use them, learn to understand them. Don't expect you to be a CI/CD developer, DevOps yourself, but at least understanding high level of your pipelines that maybe do your automatic builds or automatic testing. It will enable you to quickly spot issues, right? Because you could be the person who can look at the outputs of those things and say, oh, our build broke today. Where did it break, right? Can you have a quick look at the logs and direct it to the right team? So that, again, you're alleviating pressure from your team, because you can say, hey, it looks like it's graphic asset, so you can pass it straight on to the graphics team. But you can also highlight these things early. Iterate and playtest as early as possible. You can spend a lot of time sitting in a room and theorizing about what your game's going to look like, but these hypotheticals will crash and burn very quickly when you start working on the game, because you're going to quickly find out that the thing that you thought was going to be really fun in the game actually isn't when you start actually playing it. So ensure you do that, and you encourage your team to do that as well. And when it comes to video game development, for example, your super early prototypes, I've seen so many talks about it, super early prototypes can be paper prototypes. You can make a little tabletop version of the core loop of your game and play that. It's easy, it costs you no money, it saves you so much time, and you can start iterating on it well before you have any infrastructure set up that it will actually create or dictate how your video game will be created. And of course, do your market research and stay up to date with the trends. Play lots of other games. You know, if you're developing a game of a particular genre, what other games of that genre are out there? What are they doing? What are they doing differently? Maybe that really cool thing that you think is going to be the edge of your game is already being done somewhere else. And it doesn't mean you can't do it as well, but maybe it will give you a different lens on how you can try and do it slightly differently, or maybe your idea is already different enough, or it will also give you ideas that will help you enhance your game as well. There are lots of playing games. That's the fun part of the job, right? Working with stakeholders is a big part of the producer's role as well. And ensuring that the stakeholders, as I mentioned, internal, your directors, or external, your funding committee, maybe the government, your grants, make sure they're aware of the state of your project. Don't make them chase it up. Show initiative. So maybe you can facilitate a hub for your stakeholders where you can post summaries. Maybe they can be daily or once every 2 days or weekly, whatever cadence works for you. We do daily updates, so we have a small channel with our stakeholders where they can have a quick look at what we've achieved. Sometimes the updates are a little bit more mundane and saying, yeah, we're still working on that thing, and that's fine. But sometimes they're, of course, more exciting, where we can showcase some demo and say, look, we did this thing, look how cool it is. Or if your artists have created early drafts of what your characters or environments are going to look like, share that, be proactive, show your stakeholders that the wheels are spinning, that the team is working. And you'll need to find that balance as well, and how high level it needs to be, right, for what your stakeholders demand. And this is a great platform and a great opportunity for you and for the stakeholders to keep an eye on the priorities, because that gives them the chance to say, oh, are you still working on that thing? We would have expected you to finish it by now. So that opens the door for you to have this conversation. It's not a blaming conversation and saying, oh, why are you so slow? It's a conversation of, well, we are still working on it. Let's talk about why that is the case. Maybe we need more people helping on this side of the project, then it'll move faster. Or maybe the expectations that your stakeholders had were misaligned with what the reality of the project is. And it's great for you to be able to highlight it early before it turns into an issue when you come to renewal of the funding, and then the stakeholders find out that you're still working on that thing that you could have let them know well in advance. And of course, if you encounter any snags, any issues, let your stakeholders know. Don't be afraid. I feel like that sometimes is, you go, oh, well, we better sweep it under the rug and hope they don't find out. Of course, some internal issues you might want to keep to your own team, that's fine. But if there are larger overarching issues that will rear its ugly head further down the track, highlight them with the stakeholders. The stakeholders are there, or should be there, to help you. They should be there to help you unblock the project, help you find an alternative way forward with that. As I mentioned earlier, if you're sharing information with your stakeholders, remember they are expensive people, so your information should be brief, glanceable, but also exhaustive at the same time. They need to be able to find everything they want in there. Here's an example of representing data, which this is actually, I fell into this trap. It's so easy to kind of, you do something and that's just how you do it. And, when you're presenting like capacity allocated, right? It's so much easier to show it as a percentage, unless, maybe somebody needs to see the actual numbers, sure, but in a lot of cases, they just need to know where we're at in general. And in working with stakeholders as well, I like to draw an analogy with it's like seasons of a TV show. When you come up to an end of it, where it's going to be a point, like a milestone at which you'll be presenting, or you need to apply for new funds, or you need to talk to a new committee that will somehow be impacting your business. Make sure you have palatable deliverables for them, right? So when this season of our show ends, what can we showcase and say, yes, the project is still going to run for another 1.5 years, but here's a thing we already have. It doesn't need to be a vertical slice. If you can, that's probably even better. If a playable vertical slice, what stakeholder doesn't like that? But make sure you have something, because it's very easy to say, well, it's an early stage and we're just working on a lot of setting up infrastructure and doing this and that, and there's a lot of words. And again, stakeholders, you want snappy, accessible, quick visual information that they can go, that looks cool, you can have my money. And it also sort of makes it a bit of a cliffhanger, right? You can go, oh, look what we've already done. But wait, just you wait until you see what else we can make. We're planning to do this feature and that. And these are like some early glimpses into that as well. So it really helps you keep those people on the hook. And that's really important. Your stakeholders will probably be accessing your Jira, likely, maybe some task management. They might ask, maybe they won't. But if they do, again, little Jira segue, sorry, I can't now talk about Jira. I swear I'm not paid by Atlassian. But if you have an epic that you track a feature development, and make sure your tasks inside that epic are structured like a story, so somebody can go and read them top to bottom and get a really good picture of how did the development happen, right? What issues did we run into, in which order we tackled things, allows them to really have a very glanceable look at that, which I found probably the reason it's the only thing here is I found it to be most useful. And I already talked about a little bit about stopping trains going off tracks. It is also part of your job to make sure that you are the one who sticks your oar and asks the questions, because it can also be intimidating when you're talking to the stakeholders and suddenly they start talking about something your team is unaware of, or suddenly the priorities change. It can be scary for people to speak up. Remember, it is your job to advocate for your team, to advocate for your executive team. You are the person in the middle. So speak up, ask questions and say, wait a minute, we didn't discuss this last time. Let's realign. Let's have this conversation. And communication skills for a producer is super, super, super important. So if you feel that there are some gaps in your communication skills somewhere, find ways to fill them in, whether it's verbal, written, just general communication styles. It is so incredibly important in these negotiations to know exactly how to say things, to know exactly when to say things as well, and it can be a bit of an art as well to do that. Focusing communication is really big within the team as well. It's very easy for things to get lost everywhere, so declutter information where possible. So think of it as this big noodle situation. How can you untangle it? And I said threads, because I find threads to be the most useful tool, whatever platform you use, Discord, maybe Slack, maybe whatever other platform. Thread conversations away. Create a thread, hey, we need to fix this bug. Pull in relevant people, provide links to the Jiras, to the repros, to your, maybe you have a little video, add in the QA person, bring in relevant people, make sure that conversation is happening, make sure you've created clear action points in that conversation. You can't say, oh, can somebody try and repro it? Nobody will. You have to say, can this person do the repro for me, please? Can they confirm that this bug occurs? make sure you have a delegate for your action points. Okay, once we have a repro, can this person start looking into the fix for it, because we really, really need it fixed. And make sure these conversations keep moving and don't die. Sometimes you can come to a bit of a stalemate if you have parties maybe disagreeing on something or can't quite find common ground. Can become a little bit painful. It is your job to keep it moving, and again, this is where communication skills really come in handy, finding a way to go, okay, it seems we're still not agreeing, how can we get on the same page? Maybe we need a separate document to discuss that, or maybe we need a poll, which is my next little sticky note, is organize people to do that as well. Don't expect people to self-organize, and if you're just going to ask a question hanging in the air, what do we think? How do we think we best do that? You're likely not going to go anywhere with it. Make sure you have a poll where you can see who's voted, so that you could follow up people who haven't, or maybe you, for whatever the issue is that you're working on, maybe you have a shared document where people can express their ideas, where people can have conversations, and then at the end of it you can have a resolution. And then also you have it for traceability. If somebody questions later down the track, oh, why did we decide to do that? You can go, well, here's the trace of it. We have talked about this problem at Zoom, and here's the decision we arrived at. And make sure, this is like a little hint, but I found it super useful as well, and promote this culture with your team as well. If you've asked somebody to do something in the chat, I like to give that, if I was asked to do something, I'll give the message like the little eyes emoji, right? So the person knows I'm looking into it, and then I'll give it a check mark so they know I've done it. So that means that it ensures that everyone can have the viz into the fact that it has happened and that somebody is looking into it. And it's a really, really good culture of fast communication as well, because you don't need to follow it up, and that person doesn't need to say, I am working on it. They can just give you the eyes and you know they're looking on that. I've got a couple more slides, so I'll run through those and we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A as well. I mentioned documentation and reporting specifically. We talked about stakeholders, and I think, again, as a producer, you are in a great position to help your team and help your executive team create the information, documents, and reports that need to be either internal or external. Whether it's your game design document, you are in a great position because you're across teams, you're across the arts team, maybe you're across the game design team, you're doing some QA yourself. You will have the perfect sort of bird's eye view, right, of what's happening. So you are in a great position to create these documents. Structure them well. Make sure you spend time to do that. Every minute you spend structuring your document better, making it clearer, making it more brief, saves a minute of somebody else's time who's going to read it, and you multiply it by the number of people who are going to be reading it. So it's sometimes I'll spend a long time just polishing, highlighting things, ensuring that info is searchable and glanceable. It's very, very important. If you're providing any reports, make sure your data is bulletproof. Link it to things. Don't say we worked on that feature and produced that asset. Link the asset so we can find it easily, we can see it. We know that what you've said is true. We know not that people might be questioning it, but it's great to never even have to raise the question in the first place, right? Or any external information that you can link as well. Don't leave it until the last minute. It's very easy to go, oh, it's due on Tuesday, I'll have the time on Monday. No, do it on Thursday, because then you will have the time to think about it over the weekend. And I'm not advocating for you to do extra work over the weekend, but for a lot of us who are passionate about the things we work on, it's going to be on your mind. You're going to think about it. Somebody will pop into your mind, and in my experience, some of the best things that I've thought and I sort of forgot to add to my reports or my documentation, they had come to me in this like free time when I wasn't thinking about it. Something would pop into my mind and I go, oh, I should totally include that. So it gives you this time to do that. And in creating the documentation, I've mentioned lots of things like brevity, tone. Consider those things. Take the time to consider those things. It's very important. It saves other people so much time, and it makes your documentation, your reports, very impactful. And the reason you're writing them is to create an impact on the person who's reading them, because maybe they are in charge of funding your project. You need to make sure they are impressed by your documentation. Make sure it's at the right audience, it considers trends, considers your team capabilities, considers the needs and the goals of the project. And in order to be able to create information that is so impactful, maybe you need to take some time to work on your technical and creative writing skills. Maybe you already have those, but maybe you're aware of some gaps that you have. Take the time to work on those skills, because they will pay back many fold when you work on these documents. And the final slide that I have, and probably one of the most important slides, is remembering that you work with people. It's very easy to get caught in sort of what's happening in the process and the thing that we are doing. But remembering that positive team dynamics and the positive attitude within the team, and ensuring that it is maintained, is a part of your job. You are there to help discharge situations that are getting tense. You are there to make sure little cultural things are happening, and sometimes you are the person who needs to start them, and sometimes you are the person who needs to sort of create some trends or some little inside jokes, like memes. We really like memes, and part of my job is creating memes for our Monday meeting, and it takes me time, but it is important because the team appreciates it. Find the engagement that works for your team. That's a tricky one, because there's no golden answer to that either, right? Well, how can you engage your team? If your team are all gamers, maybe you can tap into that. Play games with them, have game jams, have little gaming discussions, have a channel where people can just banter about games for a little bit and say, oh my god, I played this really cool game over the weekend, everybody should check it out. All these things help promote this healthy culture with your team. Make sure you share any positive feedback, especially stakeholder appreciation, especially crowd appreciation. If you've taken your demo to an exhibition somewhere and you got some awesome feedback, you had people line up to play it, make sure your team knows about it. It's very easy for somebody who might be not, maybe they're remote, or maybe they're working on a very small part of the project. It's very easy for that person to not know that this has happened. Ensure that they do. Ensure that everybody knows and has seen this positive affirmation, that it'll inspire those people, right? They'll go, oh, this is so cool. People are loving what we're doing. And that's very important as well. Improve your psychology and people skills where possible. Improving skills can be, of course, time demanding, but it is, I found it very helpful. I have some background in humanities and in psychology, and I found it extremely helpful in understanding people's motivations, people's communication styles, people's sort of needs, and what drives them, what inspires them. Don't steal somebody else's thunder. Let somebody whose baby that part of the project is talk about their baby. They might not want to, and then it's okay, but firstly ask them, do you want to present your own bit? And that can be as inspiring to that person to be able to stand there for 10 minutes and talk about it, and the entire 6 months that they worked on this thing that they get to talk about for 10 minutes, those 10 minutes might be the most important part of the entire 6 months. So make sure that you give them the option. This is a funny one, but I think it's very important. If you mess up somebody's schedule with meetings, you will be forever their enemy, and nothing else you will ever do will undo that. If you made them miss their grandma's birthday dinner, they will remember that for a long time. Make sure you give people options. If especially, we work a lot with clients and stakeholders overseas, so we often have to have evening meetings or really early meetings. Give people options and advocate for this to happen. Again, being a producer, you are advocating for your team. You are the barrier between your team and a lot of bullshit that's happening out there. Advocate for, don't just say we're meeting on Tuesday at 7 p.m. That's probably the worst thing you can say. Try and find the options, give people the options, and maybe not everyone can attend, and that's fine, as long as you have the core team attending, whatever the meeting is. That's important. And of course, one of the most important things as well, and I feel that we're very lucky to be in the gaming industry where diversity is discussed a lot. And it's great. I wish more industries learned from us. You should be at the forefront of those discussions, encouraging and promoting diversity in all shapes or forms that it comes with, to ensure that you have a diverse team, to ensure that everyone on your team feels comfortable being on your team, and that will help you create that positive dynamic that we talked about. And on that note, I think we have a little bit of time for Q&A, if my timer is not lying. Thank you. Do we have a mic or something if we have questions? There's a question there. I think the mic is just coming. There we go. Excuse me.
Hi everyone, I'm Sasha from Itona. Because nobody asked questions, I just wanted to thank you for this wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was really comprehensive and clear and nice. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
I would say amazingly comprehensive. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there's a question just behind you.
So, yeah.
Great presentation. I do have a question. How do you manage, this is to do with talking about don't add just anybody to meetings, try and keep the meetings kind of under 45 minutes. But what if one of the core people, one of the people who you can't kind of say no to, want the entire team, and I mean the entire team in the meeting, and want it to be an hour to an hour and a half long, and they really don't like push back on that? How do you kind of gently push back on that in a way, because not everyone needs to be in the meetings, most people don't actually do anything, so...
Yeah. I think the best way to approach these things is support them by data where possible. So if you can find, first you can just broach it and say, hey, maybe we can rethink it. I know we've done it for 5 years, but maybe we can slightly change things. You can support it by data. Where it depends on the person. Some people you can send a link to and say, hey, have a look at that, but with other people they might not care much, so you might need to sort of regurgitate to them. So there's a lot of research that's happened and happening in that area that shows people attention spans, and they say that, you know, even committed adults have focused attention. You top out at 20 minutes and attention tops out around 50 to an hour. You just cannot go beyond that. But the other thing you can do as well is and it's an interesting way, this is just an idea that popped into my head. What if you ran an anonymous poll with the team to say, do you feel that you are getting your time spent well during those meetings? Or if not, how would you restructure those? So then ensure that it is anonymous and ensure that people feel safe to share this feedback, but also make sure it's not, even the question posed isn't antagonistic in saying, you know, oh, these meetings are bad, let's redo them, but in saying, you know, do you feel like it's time valuably spent, and if not, how would you change it, right? And you'll find that some of the best ideas will probably come from those people who might say, somebody might say, you know, I find it fine to be there for an entire hour, but somebody might say, hey, it would be great if, say, the arts team broke off into their own little meeting. After, maybe you need 10 minutes all hands, and then after that you go breakouts and your arts team goes away and talks about their things, because they don't need to listen about developers talking code and bugs that they fixed, right, necessarily. So yeah, I think maybe leaning on data, but also advocating for your team as well, right? If you're a producer, if you're a team leader, if you feel that the team is unhappy, if you feel that people are checking out, people are viewing these meetings as, oh my God, I have to go there and sit there for an hour, that's a part of your job to say, hey, this isn't healthy culture. People are not happy. People are viewing it as a negative thing. We need to change it up. And how we do it, let's talk about it. You know, let's find a way. So these are just sort of random thoughts that I had.
No, thank you. Those are all really great points.
Cheers. Do we have some more time? I think there's a question there as well. I might eat 5 minutes into your lunchtime. Hello.
Hi. I'm Francesca from Dinosaur Polo Club. Just interested in your kind of leadership style. Obviously, with being a producer, we kind of there is quite a lot we're in charge of as such. But how do you manage that with kind of empowering your team and not being a blocker for them, and that they sort of feel like they've got ownership over the processes?
I'm so sorry. You've asked about the communication styles that I employ with the
like
team?
your leadership style, like
leadership styles,
as
right.
a producer.
I think what with the company I work for now, what really helps is we are very, very horizontal, and it helps me as a producer to feel like I'm just part of the team. I'm not, because I feel often hierarchy can really discourage people and make them feel a bit hostile or a bit uncomfortable talking to somebody who's above them. Horizontal structure helps greatly with that, and being part of the team, I think what I talked about, knowing your product is a really big thing, and it might at first you might think that I'm not quite answering your question, but I think the fact that as a producer or maybe a director or whomever, a salesperson, the fact that you know your product, that you use it, that you play the game, that you understand its intention, makes you much closer to the team. So they will feel like you are a part of the team because you understand what they're working on, and bringing value to the project on that level as well. Because as a producer, one thing is to create Jiras and tickets, and often people see it as just noise and saying, right, you create a lot of noise, but what do you actually do, kind of, is the question. And I think if I'm the one who's there, when a QA round is happening, I make sure I have the time to do QA myself. I make sure I'm on the floor, I'm reporting issues, I'm creating, repros for bugs that I find so that I can pass them to developers to say, hey, this was the scenario, this is the problem I found. That creates the trust between me and them because they see that I'm one of them. I understand what we're working on and I'm helping us all move in that direction. And I think that creates a really good dynamic between the team. And from a completely different angle as well, I think being very proactive in problem solving is a huge thing as well, because when people see that, if they say, oh man, this thing really bugs me, and then I go and fix it, they go, oh, he just makes shit happen. And then that creates this two-way avenue, because the next time I need something from them, they don't view it as me asking them or telling them what to do, but they go, oh, we are a team and I've done something for them and they've done something for me. There's this scene that always comes to mind from Ted Lasso, the TV show, and he was hired as a coach for this team, and they really don't like him and they don't want him here at the beginning. And he creates this suggestion box for the team, and they just all throw in profanities and all sorts of things into it, and then one person says the pressure in the showers is shit, and the first thing he goes and does and fixes the pressure in the showers, and the shift in dynamic is instant because the team goes, oh, he's actually here to help us. And I think that is the super important foundation that you can build upon. And then communication just flows so easily because you don't need to walk on eggshells around people. You can casually talk to them because they have this trust and this relationship with you. So
that's cool. Thank you.
Cool.
Did you have a question?
Yeah. That's all good. I'll come round. Thank you, Dennis, for the talk. You talked about how when people are doing the little, I'm going to dive into research a bit and get in the rabbit holes and things like that. And I'm curious how production might look different, if it does at all, at the beginning of a project when it's largely a complex, unknown space and the creative directors are going, ooh, let's envision all the futures and things like that. How does production look at that stage of a project?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we definitely structure early stages of the project to be very different. So I mentioned spikes, which is a type of ticket in Agile and Jira. So the idea is that before we tackle big pieces of work that are unknown, that we don't know, well, we need to do that thing, but we don't know how we're going to do it, we create spike tickets for them, which are very small, very very time-boxed tickets, right? Where you go, okay, you're going to go away for 2 days and research that problem, and then we will talk about what you've managed to find in those 2 days. And we run a lot of shared documents as well. So if it's early in the stage of the project, you might need to create you might need to make a lot of technical decisions about, okay, which engine are we using, which, and if we're doing this, which plugins are we using, which other sort of software, what it might be. So having it as a documented technical discussion is really helpful because people can throw in ideas, and that again helps with rabbit holes because you can create it as a top-level discussion, and then you might have a more senior member who is maybe more technically equipped to make a decision, for example, on which tools you might be using, and then you can dive deeper and then sort of start scoping out the bits of that. And when it comes to creatives as well, it's very much a high level, right, of creating, okay, let's create visual briefs before we decide and go down rabbit holes of creating art and animations for everything. Let's go with visual briefs first, so people can go away and independently find references that they like, and then you can sort of Frankenstein one thing out of that, and that will give you direction. So, and in terms of the actual production, as I say, it's time boxing things is really important at that stage, because otherwise people can go away for weeks and research things, and they might come out with some brilliant things at the end of it, but unfortunately the reality of it is that it is a project that needs to be time boxed and scoped because you have so much budget, which is why you need to make these decisions. And sometimes you might make a wrong decision, and you might have to go back and say, we should not have done that, and it's okay, it happens to everyone. But the fact that you do it in sort of measurable chunks at the beginning, I think, is important. Cool. Is that us? I think so. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much for your time. And I'll be around, so if you have any further questions or want to connect, come up and say hi. Cheers. Thank you.